Welcome to our class. Our discussion for today is all about evaluation of primary and secondary sources. In conducting any historical research, different sources of information are required to gain extensive knowledge on a particular topic. Some researchers rely on written sources, while others choose to make use of oral sources. No matter what source is being utilized, it is important to know which among the gathered sources can provide accurate details and information about the historical event or subject being researched on. It is important to distinguish primary from secondary sources. The degree to which the author of a piece is removed from the actual event being described illustrates whether the source is reporting impressions first-hand or second-hand. As such, the primacy of primary over secondary sources should be considered by every researcher. Now, let us have a short recap of what primary sources is. It is considered as contemporary accounts of an event, personally written or narrated by an individual person who directly experienced or participated in the said event. Aside from the eyewitness testimonies, primary sources also include materials that capture the event, such as photographs, voice and video recordings, and the like. These materials are considered as original sources that directly narrate the details of the event. These sources can be in the form of diary and journal entries, letters, memoirs, journals, speeches, interviews, official records such as government publications, minutes reports, artworks, and artifacts. Primary sources mostly include unpublished works of individuals that were discovered after some time, such as during historical excavations and historical research done in public and private libraries. In some instances, newspapers or magazines articles are also considered primary source as long as they were written soon after events and not as historical accounts. On the other hand, secondary sources serve as interpretations or readings of primary sources. Usually, the author of a piece incorporates his or her personal insights and interpretations, thus detaching the original value of the component of subject being discussed. These sources usually contains analysis of primary sources by experts, academicians, and professionals. These are usually in the form of published works such as journals, articles, reviews, books, conference, papers, and documentaries. They can also be based on interpretations of other secondary sources or a combination of primary and secondary sources. Many historical researchers also bank on secondary sources to get different perspectives on a particular topic. However, relying too much on secondary sources may blur out the actual details of particular historical events. So, as a student, it is important for us to know how to evaluate primary and secondary sources since we are trying to discover more about history. And later on, um, we will going to scan documents, scan historical evidences on the past since we are studying readings in Philippine history. All right. So it is already common knowledge in the academe that both primary and secondary sources are important in fleshing out details of significant events in history. Okay, so however, classifying a source as primary or secondary has never been an easy task. So, um, it is really not easy to classify the difference of primary or secondary sources or to identify what um, documents is the primary or the secondary. So, nevertheless, the primacy of primary over secondary sources has always been recognized. This is due to the fact that a primary source provides better and more accurate historical details compared to a secondary source. So according to the historians, even in the historians, they have this perspective or they have these opinions that primary source is better than secondary because this provides accurate data and accurate historical evidences. However, the authenticity and reliability of primary sources should be scrutinized before they are using it. In this day and age, the proliferation of fake news is evident in both print and digital media platforms. Thus, it becomes more apparent that sources of text should be scrutinized for their credibility. However, in a nation where is minimal documentation of oral history, it is very difficult to trace the primary sources of many written historical records that can help in understanding the relevance of historical events in addressing contemporary social issues. Although primacy is given to primary sources, there are instances where when the credibility of the sources are contestable. Garraghan, in the year 1950, he identified 6 points of inquiries to evaluate the authenticity of a primary source. First is the date. When was when was it produced? Second, localization. Where did it originate? Third is the authorship. Who wrote it? Fourth, analysis. What pre-existing material served as the basis for its production? Fifth, integrity. What was its original form? Sixth, credibility. What is the evidential value of its content? The absence of primary documents that can attest to the accuracy of any historical claim is really a problem in the extensive study of history. In that sense, the significance of secondary sources should not be discredited. Secondary sources are readily available in print and digital repositories. Secondary accounts of historical events are narratives commonly passed from one generation to generation. Yet, similar to the usual problem with passing information from one point to another, details can be altered. As information is relayed from one person to person, the accuracy of the source material is compromised. Nevertheless, secondary source materials in the study of Philippine history, without conjectures and refutations, have the capacity to fill in the gaps caused by the lack of or absence of the primary sources. Given the possibility of forgery and mislabeling, historians not only evaluate the sources in terms of external characteristics that focus on the questions of where, when, and by whom. They also evaluate in terms of the internal criteria, which include 7 factors identified by Howell and Prevenier in the year 2001. First, the genealogy of the document. This refers to the development of the document. The document may be original, a copy, or a copy of the copy. Second, the genesis of the document. This includes the situations and the authorities during the document's production. Third, the originality of the document. This includes the nature of the document, whether it is an or eyewitness account or merely passing of existing information. Fourth, the interpretation of the document. This pertains to deducing meaning from the document. Fifth, the authorial authority of the document. This refers to the relationship between the document subject matter and its author. Sixth, the competence of the observer. This refers to the author's capabilities and qualifications to critically comprehend and report informations. And the last one, the trustworthiness of the observer. This refers to the author's integrity, whether he or she fabricates or reports truthfully. So in general, the reliability of primary sources is assessed on how these sources are directly related and closely connected to the reliability. So, reliability of secondary sources depends on the elapsed time from the date of the event to the date of their creation. More likely, the farther the date creation from the actual event, the more the reliable the source is. So I hope that this short video will give you a better understanding of the difference, what is the difference between the primary and the secondary sources, as well as on how to evaluate the historical data or the historical documents that you will going to um, do or use later on when we um, study the other lessons of the subject. So thank you for listening and have a great day.